This week, a client called in with the following scenario. They have a 0 hours worker and they've been signed off sick, and they wanted to know, do they have to pay them sick pay?
Because they're asking the question about a 0 hours worker, it's a common query we get because the rights between someone who's a worker on a 0 hours contract are sometimes different to the rights that employees have got. So employees are the gold standard. They have, the full suite of employment rights under the UK legislation, whereas 0 hours workers don't have as much protection. So it's a common query that we get is to find out, is statutory sick pay, so SSP, a right that 0 hours workers have?
And what was the solution that you gave to them?
So, as with lots of things employment law related, it's a it depends answer. So with a worker to be eligible for SSP, they have to hit what's known as the lower earnings limit. So they have to be earning on average £123 a week to be eligible for SSP. If they hit that earnings limit, then they are going to be eligible for sick pay. However, that only kicks in from the 4th day of absence. The first 3 days that they're off, they're not paid anything.
How long is it paid for?
So the very nature of 0 hours workers is that they aren't necessarily just going to be working the same number of days and hours every week for the rest of the year. They're a 0 hours worker. You might have them a couple of hours this week or lots of hours next week, or then maybe nothing for a few weeks if you haven't got any more assignments for them. So the way it works with SSP and 0 hours workers is the hours that they are on your rota for, those are the hours that would be considered to be eligible for days when SSP is paid. Beyond that, there's an argument that you wouldn't need to be paying it to them because they weren't on the rota to start with. So it's a bit of a kind of it depends and a bit of a convoluted kind of way to get to the end of the question, which is why it's quite a common question that we get, really, is because it's not a straightforward answer.
And have the laws on this changed in recent times, or do they change frequently on this, or have they been static for a while?
The general principles have been static. Where we do see changes with that lower earnings limit, so often that may well change depending on government policy, inflation, and when the rates go up each April. But I would say between now and April 23, that's probably going to be static.
And if they didn't pay them sick pay when they should have paid them, what could happen?
So if someone's eligible for a payment and it's not given to them, then that will potentially be an unauthorised deduction from wages and likely a breach of contract claim as well. So even 0 hours workers who have very limited rights, that is something that they could bring a tribunal claim for.
So what happened with this particular client? Did they end up having to pay?
So in this circumstance, the staff member didn't reach the lower earnings limit, so they're not eligible for the SSP. But it is important to always take advice to make sure, one, that you've calculated it correctly, and two, that you haven't missed anything else. Because the big risk that you sometimes have with 0 hours workers is you may think, well, as a company, we're protected because they don't have that many rights, and an unlawful deduction from wages claim might be very small. However, the risk that you've got is if they haven't got the appropriate documentation in place and that work has not been dealt with lawfully, they could have an argument that actually they're an employee, which could mean that you're on the hook for a bigger claim. So always take advice.